Hello class, this is my second video on the free weight and non-traditional exercises assignment. The first exercise is going to be the tire flip. Now, some common coaching cues of this exercise, I don't have very many, and I haven't found very many through my research, but I've found a few that I think transfer a lot into other movements like the sumo deadlift or the power clean, or any deadlift really. It would be hips through the tire or push your hips forward. Because the exercise doesn't involve picking the tire up, but rather pushing into the tire, which ties into the second cue, your hips are going to be a huge part of this exercise. So feet wide or feet back, you don't want your feet too close to the tire because then it turns into almost like an RDL for those of you who have done a tire flip before. And these errors also tie into what I kind of mentioned already. The hips rise too early, so even if the feet are back, there are those who will kind of tend to pitch up like a tent with their butt in the air, and a lot of that tension goes on the lower back, or most of it really, and it turns into an interesting RDL. Your feet too close to the tire. Now, I would say that when you get set up in this, you're going to want your feet, at least for me, because I'm almost 6 foot, I would say 5'11", 5'10", I like to get my feet about 3 to 4 feet away from the tire, so I'm almost in like a sprinting stance. And you see people lifting the tire instead of pushing it, and then they almost do a bicep curl picking it up. But rather, you want your chest and your shoulders locked into the tire, so that way you're able to perform what you need to. That's almost starting to run low to the ground. So this is obviously a very unique movement. And in my research, I had a hard time finding any kind of real progression or regression. I mean, you could also find some, but because it's such a unique exercise, I obviously would need a larger tire to progress further. Maybe even change your form a little bit to change the variability and the stimulus to it, but my progression, I would say, would be a larger tire, and the regression would be a smaller tire. Now, the benefits of a tire flip that I've found in my research has been lower body power development. So it's essentially starting from a dead weight position when you're really low to the ground. It's almost like a deadlift from the first repetition or a power clean. The exercise itself, you have to take off right away. This also works on triple extension of the hips, knees, and ankles. Now, I think this has some interesting advantages over other movements, is that it can be fun and novel for your client or athlete. If your sport is not strongman, you're probably not going to use this movement very much. Maybe for a football player closer to sports season or in sports season. But in my experience, when I've been at a facility that had a tire or had multiple tires, it was nice to be able to bring my clients or athletes in to be able to use every now and then. So instead of using like a step up or a lunge to work those muscles in the legs, I like to use a tire. It's a change of pace, which ties into the first one kind of. So it's something they don't normally use very often, and it can be fun and challenging. Now, like most strongman movements, if the tire is large enough or wide enough and you have a strong enough grip, it can be very unstable, which would make it a different stimulus. And tires are relatively inexpensive, so you can buy one for like $50. They're pretty cheap. You can even find some free on the side of the road too. They're not as uncommon as one would think. So most of the research says use only on athletes. I probably shouldn't say this for the sake of the assignment, but for me personally, I like to say that everyone's used it. I've used it on older populations. Women 60s and their 70s, and even a few in their 80s. So this is anecdotal, but a few in their 80s that have been able to flip tires by using the same cues that I had mentioned earlier with great success. But officially, it's typically only used for athletes, but at least what the research says, but you can use it for the general populace as well.